परमानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमुक्तिं दन्वतीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं निर्मलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावतीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. Shivom friends, today we will be reading chapter 87 onwards of Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayana. This is third book on creation, that is Utpatti Kand, and it is 87th chapter. In this chapter, 10 brothers Aindwas become the 10 words of the next day of Brahma. It is being described. The sun said, O great father of creation. In this way, these venerable Brahmins remained at that spot for a long time, occupied in their minds with these various thoughts and their several actions. They remained in this state until their bodies dried up by the exposure to the sun and air and dropped down in time like withered leaves of tree. Their dead bodies were devoured by the voracious beast of the forest or tossed about like some ripe fruit by monkeys on the hills. These Brahmins, their thoughts turned away from outward objects and concentrated on Brahma, continued enjoying divine joy in their spirits until the close of the Kalp cycle at the end of the 4 ages, that is Yugas. At the end of the Kalp, there is an utter extinction of sunlight by the constant rains poured down by the heavy Pushkar and Avarta clouds at the great flood. When the hurricane of desolation blew on all sides and buried all beings under the universal ocean, it was then your dark night and the previous creation slept as if in yogic sleep, in your sleeping self. Thus, continuing in your spirit, you contained all things in their spiritual forms in yourself. Upon your waking this day with your desire of creation, all these things are exhibited to your view like a copy of everything that was already in your innermost mind or spirit. I have thus related to you, O Brahma, how these 10 Brahmins were personified as so many Brahmas. These 10 become the 10 bright orbs situated in the empty sphere of your mind. I am the eldest among them, consecrated in this temple of the sky and appointed by you, O Lord of all, to regulate the portions of time on earthly beings. Now, I have given you a full account of the 10 orbs of heaven, which are no other than the 10 persons united in the mind of Brahma, and now appearing as detached from him. This beautiful world that you behold, appearing to your view with all its wonderful structures spread out in the skies, serves at best as a snare to entrap your senses and delude your understanding by taking the unrealities as realities in your mind. This was a small chapter, and in this chapter only this much was given. And in the next chapter, chapter 88, detachment of Brahma, need to act, and only one's own mind can change one's own mind. This is described. Brahmaji said to Vasishtha, O Brahma, who is the best of Brahmins? Sorry, O Brahmin, who is the best of the Brahmins? The sun god remained silent after telling me about the 10 Brahmins. I thought upon this for some time in my mind, then said, O son, tell me what I am to create next. Tell me, O son, what need is there for me to make any more worlds? after these 10 globes have come into existence. Now, O great sage, the sun, having long considered in his mind about what I wanted him to say, replied to me in the following manner in appropriate words. The sun said, My lord, who is devoid of efforts or desire? What need do you have to create? This work of creation is only for your pleasure. Bhog apvar artham drishya. I remind of another shlok from Yoga this is from Patanjali Yoga Darshan. Bhog apvarg artham drishya. So this same thing is said here, that this creation is only for your pleasure. O Lord, who is free from desires and gives rise to worlds like sunbeams, rays, waters, and the sunshine is accompanied by the shadow. You are indifferent to fostering or forsaking your body and need nothing to desire or renounce for your pleasure or pain. You, O Lord of creatures, create all these only for the sake of your pleasure, and so you retract them all in yourself, as the sun by turns gives and withdraws his light. You, who is unattached to the world, make your creation as work of love to you, and not any effort or endeavor on your part. If you desist from stretching creation out of the Supreme Spirit, what good can you derive from your inactivity? Do your duty as it may present itself to you, rather than remain inactive, doing nothing. A dull person, like a dirty mirror that doesn't reflect images, is of no use at all. The wise have no desire of doing anything that is beyond their reach, but they never like to leave out anything that presents itself before them and is useful. Therefore, do your work as it comes to you, with a cheerful heart, a calm mind, and a tranquil soul, as if it were in your sleep, and devoid of desires that you can never reap. You desire pleasure, O Lord of Lords, from forming the orbs of the sons of Hindu, so the Lord of gods will give you your reward for your works of creation. Nobody with their external organs of vision can see the worlds as clearly as you, O Lord, see with the eyes of your mind. For whom, by seeing them with his eyes, can say whether you are created or uncreated? Only he who has created these worlds from his mind, and no other person with his open eyes, can behold me face to face. The 10 worlds are not the work of so many Brahmas as it appeared to you before. Nobody has the power to destroy them when they are seated so firmly in the mind. It is easy to destroy what is made by the hand and to shut out the sensible objects from our perception. But who can annul or disregard what is ascertained by the mind? It is impossible for anyone except the owner to remove whatever belief is deep rooted in the minds of living beings. No curse can remove from the mind whatever has become a habit of confirmed belief in the mind, even though it can kill the body. Principle deeply rooted in the mind forms the man according to its system. It is impossible by any means to make him otherwise, as it is impossible to make a rock bear fruit by watering its root like a tree. So this was again a very short chapter, but there was very meaningful verses are there from 18 to 20. Should I repeat them? No, I think I should move on. In chapter 89, the story of the lovers Indra and Ahilya, the fixation of their minds on each other. So there is another story of Indra and Ahilya. The sun said, the mind is the maker and master of the world. The mind is the first supreme being. Whatever is done by the mind is said to be done. The actions of the body are held as no acts. Look at the capacity of the mind in the example of the sons of Hindu. They were only ordinary Brahmins, but by their meditation of Brahma in their minds, they became assimilated in Brahma. One thinking himself as composed of the body becomes subject to all the incidents of physicality, but he who knows himself as bodiless is freed from all evils that attend the body. Looking on the outside, we are subject to the feelings of pain and pleasure, but the inward sighted yogi is unconscious of the pain or pleasure of his body. Thus, it is the mind that causes all our errors in this world. Evidence of this is the example of Indra and his consort Ahilya. The Yoga Vasishtha's story of two adulterous lovers, Indra and Ahilya, has many connections with another story that would have been well known to an Indian India reader, that of Indra, king of the gods, seducing Ahilya, the wife of sage Gautama. One of the seven rishis, the sage cursed both Indra and his wife. The curse on Ahilya was removed by Ram. As the story became popular over time, the curse was that Ahilya was turned into a stone and came back to life when touched by Ram's foot. So this is all given in Ramayana, but this is Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayana. So Brahmaji said, "Tell me, my lord son, who was this Indra and who was that Ahilya, so that by hearing my understanding may have its clear sightedness." The son said, "It is related, my lord. In former times there reigned a king at Magad, Indradyumna by name, and similar to his namesake, he has a wife fair as the moon, with eyes as beautiful as lotuses. Her name was Ahilya, and she resembled Rohini, the moon's favorite. In that city lived a rascal at the head of all the libertines. He was the cheating son of a Brahman and was known by the name of Indra. Now this queen Ahilya came to hear the story of the former Ahilya, wife of Gautam, and her lust related to her at a certain time. Hearing the story, Queen Ahilya felt a passion for the other Indra, the libertine, and became impatient in the absence of his company. She was thinking only how he should come to her. She was fading like a tender vine thrown adrift in the burning desert. She was burning with an inner flame on beds of cooling leaves of watery lotus and plantain trees. She was spinning amidst all the enjoyments of her royal estate, like a poor fish lying exposed on the dry bed of a pool in summer heat. She lost her modesty with her self-possession. She repeated in her frenzy, "Here is Indra, and there he comes to me." Finding her in this pitiable plight, a lady of her palace took compassion on her and said, "I will safely conduct Indra before you, ladyship, in a short time." No sooner did she hear her companion say, "I will bring you your desired object," than she opened her eyes with joy and fell prostrate at her feet, like one lotus flower falls from another. Then, as the day passed on and the shade of night covered the face of nature, the lady made her haste to the house of Indra, the Brahmin's boy. The clever lady used her persuasions as far as she could, and then succeeded to bring this Indra with her and present him before her royal mistress. She then adorned herself with paste and paints and wreaths of fragrant flowers, and conducted her lover to a private apartment where they enjoyed their fill. The youth, also decorated in his jewels and necklaces, delighted her with his sweet caresses, as the spring season renovates the tree groves with his luscious juice. Henceforward, this ravished queen saw the world full with the figure of her beloved Indra, and she didn't think much at all of the excellencies of her royal lord, her husband. After some time, certain facial indications by the queen caused the great king to know of her love for the Brahmin Indra. For as long as she thought of her lover Indra, her face glowed like a full-blown lotus, blooming with the beams of her moon-like lover. The Brahmin boy Indra also was inflamed with all his enraptured senses for love of her. and he couldn't remain for a moment in any place without her company. The king heard the painful news of their affections for each other and of their unconcealed meetings. He also observed many examples of their attachment and at different times gave them his reprimands and punishments as they deserved. They were both cast in the cold water of a tank in cold weather, where instead of betraying any sign of pain, they kept smiling together as in their merriment. Then the king had them to be taken out of the tank and ordered them to repent for their crimes. But the infatuated pair was far from doing so, and replied to the king in the following manner: Great king, as long we continue to reflect on the unblemished beauty of each other's face, so long are we lost in the meditation of one another and forget our own selves. We are delighted in our persecutions, and as no torment can separate us from each other, we are not afraid of separation, even though you can separate our souls from our bodies. They were thrown in a frying pan upon fire, where they remained unhurt and exclaimed, We rejoice, O King, at the delight of our souls in thinking of one another. They were tied to the feet of elephants to be trampled, but they remained uninjured and said, King, we feel our hearty joy at our memories of each other. They were lashed with rods and straps and many other sorts of scourges which the king devised from time to time, but being brought back from the scourging ground and asked about their suffering, they returned the same answer as before. Moreover, said the Brahmin Indra to the king, This world is full with the form of my beloved one. All your punishments inflict no pain on her because she views the whole world as full of myself. Therefore, all your punishments to torment the body can give no pain to the mind, which is my true self and constitutes my personality that resides in my person. This body is only an ideal form and presents a shadowy appearance to view. You can pour out your punishments upon it for a while, but it amounts to no more than striking a shadow with a stick. Nobody can break down a brave mind. Then tell me, great king, what do the powers of the mighty amount to? The causes that conspire to disturb the nature of the resolute mind are the false conceptions of external appearances. Therefore, it is better to chastise such bodies which mislead the mind to err. The mind is forever firm, that is steadfast to its fixed purpose. The mind identifies with the object which it has constantly in its thoughts. Being and not being are words applicable to bodies. They do not apply to the mind because what is positive in thought cannot be negated of it in any way. The mind is immovable and cannot be moved by any effort like one move bodies. It is impregnable to all external actions, and neither your anger or favor can have any effect on it. It is possible for men of strong resolutions to change the course of their actions, but where is such a strong minded man to be found, who is able to withstand or change the currents of his thought? It is impossible to move the mind from its fixed fulcrum, just as it is impracticable for tender stags to remove a mountain from its base. This black eyed beauty is the fixed prop of my mind. She is seated in the lofty temple of my mind like goddess Bhavani on Mount Kailash. I fear nothing as long as I see this beloved preserver of my life and soul before me. I sit amidst the conflagration of a burning mountain in summer's heat, but wherever I stand or fall, I am cooled under the shadow of her showering cloud. I think of nothing except the only object of my thought and wish. I cannot persuade myself to believe me as any other than Indra, the lover of Ahilya. It is by constant association that I have come to this belief of myself. I cannot think of me otherwise than what is in my nature. Know, O king, that the wise have only one object in their thought and view. The mind, like the Mount Meru, is not moved by threat or pity. It is the body that you can tame by the one or the other means. The wise, O king, are masters of their minds. There is none and nothing to deter them from their purpose. Know it for certain, O king, that neither these bodies about us nor these bodies and sensations of ours are realities. They are only shows of truth and not the movers of the mind. On the contrary, it is the mind that supplies the bodies and senses with their powers of action, just like water supplies trees and branches with their sap. The mind is generally believed to be a sensuous and passive principle, wholly moved by the outward impressions of senses. But in truth, the mind is the active and moving principle of the organs of action, because all the senses become dormant in the absence of the action of the mind. So the functions of the whole creations are at a stop without the activity of the universal. So with this, chapter 89 also comes to end. And now let us take the chapter 90, in which the Indra's and Ahilya's attachment through reincarnations is described. The son said, "The lotus eye king, thus defied by this, this perverse Indra, addressed sage Bharat, who was sitting by him. The king spoke, Lord, you are acquainted with all morality. See this ravisher of my wife, and hear the arrogant speech that he utters before our face. Please, O great sage, pronounce your curse upon him without delay, because it is a breach of justice to spare the wicked, just as it is to hurt the innocent." Being thus asked by the great king Bharat, the best of the wise Munis considered the crime of this wicked soul Indra. Then he pronounced his curse by saying, "Do you, O reprobate sinner, soon meet with your perdition, together with this sinful woman who is so faithless to her husband." Then they both replied to the king and his venerable sage, saying, "What fools must you be to have wasted your curse, the great gain of your thumb, on our devoted heads? The curse you have pronounced can do us very little harm. Though our bodies should fall, yet it cannot affect our inner minds and spirits. The inner principle of the soul, owing to its inscrutable and subtle and intellectual nature, can never be destroyed by anybody anywhere." The son added, "Then this fascinated pair, head over heels in love, fell down by effect of the curse, just like when branches cut from a tree fall upon the ground. Being subjected to the torment of reincarnation, they were both born as a pair of deer in mutual attachment, and then as a couple of turtle doves in their inseparable alliance. Afterwards, O Lord of our creation, this loving pair came to be born as man and woman, who by their practice of austerities came to be reborn at last as a Brahmin and Brahmani. Thus the curse of Bharat was capable of only transforming their bodies. It never touched their minds or souls, which continued in their unshaken attachment in every state of their reincarnation. Therefore, wherever and in whatever shape they come to be reborn, they always assume the form of a male and a female, pair by virtue of their delusion and memories. Seeing the true love that existed between this loving pair in the forest, the trees also become enamored of the other sex of their own kinds. With this, chapter 90 also comes to an end, and I think we should stop today's reading session here itself. 4 chapters are covered, and the story of Indra and Ahilya is covered here. With the grace of Lord Ram, we will again meet for the reading of other chapters. Until then, Shivoham, friends.